Hello and welcome. I'm Allison Bruner, writer and narrator of Medicine Stories, the heart and soul of my apprenticeship in earth-based spirituality. These stories share my personal experience as an apprentice in the Andean mystical tradition. I do not claim authority, nor do I intend these essays to represent its teachings or cosmology in any comprehensive way. I offer these stories with humility and gratitude, in the hope that they might serve as lanterns for others moving through change, uncertainty, and spiritual transformation. Please do not take them as instruction, nor as a template to follow. They're simply a reminder that none of us walks through life's initiations alone. Essay 1. My first lesson in alchemy. Stepping into fire ceremony and onto the ground beneath my feet. The orange post-it note looked small and bright against the dark wood of my altar. I ripped off a third of it and held the smaller scrap with a pair of tweezers, feeling a flicker of curiosity and hope. It had been a long time since I'd felt this kind of pull, a sense of rightness that arises when you stop trying to think your way through a crisis and begin working directly with energy. This room was my sanctuary. One wall was painted slate blue with chalkboard paint, layered with white chalk journal entries and sketches. A living map of my inner life. My altar, a vintage trunk draped with tapestries, held crystals, seashells, and pine cones, objects that tethered me to the earth and the sacred. That night, it would serve as a waka, or sacred site whose potency deepens with every ritual and ceremony held within it. This is where I would perform my first fire ceremony. I didn't write words on the paper I'd torn. My mentor, a shamanic guide, trained in the Andean mystical tradition, had been very specific. Do not write on the paper. This was my first lesson in working at the level of energy rather than form. She explained that the Karo are an agrarian and pastoral culture, living rugged, practical lives in close relationship with the land. They value efficiency. They don't seek altered states or rely on mind-altering plant medicines. Instead, they cultivate a direct, functional relationship with the living energy of the earth. That was the relationship she intended to teach me. I picked up the first piece of paper, the one that would hold what I needed to release. I called to mind the judgment I'd been carrying, that my life shouldn't look this way, that I had failed spiritually, that I'd somehow created this mess that I was in. I scanned my body and inner world, noticing despair, shame, and loathing. Instead of pushing them away, I let myself stay with them. Then, with a deep inhale, I gathered those sensations and blew them into the fibers of the paper. Sizzle. The flame from my lighter consumed the paper. I watched it blacken and curl, felt my body soften, my breath deepen, my nervous system shift into a lower gear. I have always been a believer in the realms of spirit and the unseen. My parents used to tell a story from when I was 5 years old. My younger sister and I were standing at the end of our block in York, Pennsylvania, talking animatedly to no one at all. Then we ran back to our parents with a message from my recently deceased grandmother. She shared details about my father's life that I couldn't have known and told him she loved him. In high school, I felt that gravity and I were fundamentally at odds. Newtonian science never appealed to me. I was the girl who was always spilling things, much to my mother's chagrin. I remember being dropped off at Bishop McDevitt High School in Harrisburg in the late 1980s, an old collegiate Gothic Catholic school with twin towers modeled after Notre Dame, perched atop a steep hill. As I stepped out of the car, my pens and pencils would tumble from my bag and roll downhill toward the curb. I'd watch them, disappointed and faintly bewildered that the ordinary rules of physics applied to me after all. Growing up, my favorite shows were Casper the Friendly Ghost, Bewitched, and I Dream of Jeannie. I didn't think of this as spirituality then. I just sensed that the world was more pliable than it appeared. That intention, imagination, and ritual could move energy, maybe even matter itself if approached with care. Years later, my guide would tell me, we can move mountains once we attain a certain level of consciousness. Even Jesus said we could do things greater than he did. By my late 20s, my girlfriends and I were improvising rituals. I'd scavenge scraps of information from the library and piece together ceremonies to attract husbands or amplify a friend's magnetism. We'd squeeze into my 500 square foot apartment, gather tea and snacks, gossip, giggle, and recount god-awful dates. Then we'd get down to business. The results were sometimes so swift and uncanny that we had to wrangle the energy into something manageable before it ran amok. One friend ended up practically needing a secretary to manage all the admirers her newfound magnetism had drawn, while another married the man she had called in, and decades later, they're still in love. I understood the power of intention, but I didn't yet have a container for it, nor had I learned the ethics of non-interference or how to wield this energy in service rather than for ego. I had a lot to learn, and that need would eventually lead me to deeper guidance. That container began to form in 2015 out of necessity. From January to early July, I attended 7 ayahuasca ceremonies with jungle medicine shamans. During the second ceremony, I experienced a Kundalini awakening. My body erupted into an involuntary breath of fire, a rapid, rhythmic pumping of the diaphragm that I couldn't stop. Each forceful snap and inhale-exhale left me euphoric, blissful, and at one with everything. By late September, the glow of spiritual illumination had dimmed, replaced by a dark night of the senses. I became hyper-aware, psychically sensitive, absorbing the weight of everyone around me. Even with 2 decades of deep inner work, I realized I still carried wounds that now demanded a transpersonal lens. My longtime therapist, who had guided me through profound transformation, couldn't fully walk this next unfamiliar path with me. I became acutely sensitive to noise, conflict, and the raw energy of others. The city felt like a minefield. I took Ubers just to avoid the friction of commuting. When my transportation budget ran dry, I walked 5 miles from West Philadelphia to the Center City's skyscraper where I worked, and back again, just to stay inside my own protective bubble. That's when I began my weekly phone sessions with my new shamanic guide, someone who'd help me integrate those psychedelic experiences and focus more on finding the miraculous in the mundane, on chopping wood and carrying water. "You are going through an overturning," she told me. I never quite knew what that meant, but the word sounded accurate. Everything in my life seemed to have turned upside down and was falling apart. I was incredulous, aggrieved. "You're going to learn a lot from this experience, which is why this is happening," she said. "Release your expectations around what your life ought to look like." But I'd had a spiritual awakening, I argued. I'd realized, not just intellectually, but experientially, that I am more than human. I'm spirit, and I'm connected and one with everyone and everything. I assumed I'd graduated from Earth School and had attained some level of enlightenment. "You're still having a human experience," my mentor explained, unimpressed. "You're on a path of liberation, but it doesn't happen overnight. Release expectations about what the journey should look like." I deflated, but committed to seeing myself through what was to come and the challenge put forth by Spirit. I felt it an honor to be there in the first place. "You're a conduit for upper world energies, Allison, but you're not anchored," she said. The January awakening had blasted me so high that my feet seemed to float above the city sidewalks. "You need to bring those energies down and get grounded." The park 1 block away left me uninspired. It was loud there and often crowded. Fast food wrappers settled on benches and empty plastic bottles blew across grass in the breeze. I retreated to my bathtub instead, adding mineral salts and lighting candles. I watched the flames flicker and imagined what it would feel like to touch the clouds. I called in all the elements of nature I could to hold me and keep me in my body until I could escape the city on weekends, to sit on rocks and stand against trees on quiet rural trails. I began a practice of imagining roots growing from my body into the center of the earth, while also feeling held by the chair beneath me, which rested on the foundation of my home that pressed gently against the earth herself. I focused on the breath, moving in and out of my lungs, sensing where my physical vessel ended and the rest of the world began. I let my body sink into its weight. Slowly, the constant mental chatter eased. My muscles unclenched, and I felt a measure of peace. I told her I felt like a failure, that my friendships were dissolving, my finances were tanking, and my health was worsening. What used to inspire me left me flat. I thought I had created this mess through some spiritual lack. "How else can you see this?" she asked, a question she would return to again and again over the years. Perspective mattered. I learned I could shift my relationship to life's challenges, moving from a sense of victimhood to one of empowerment, by seeing each experience as a lesson and an opportunity for growth and spiritual evolution. She invited me to stop fighting, resisting, and struggling against what was, and to step into the field of infinite possibility. It's a 0-point, neutral space where countless outcomes exist, including ones that once felt impossible. In this space, we nourish what we want to create with our focus, energy, and intention, without clinging to the outcome and without judging what emerges along the way. Back at my altar, I picked up the second orange rectangular paper. I remembered her instructions. This time, feel gratitude. Say thank you, thank you, thank you. I thought of the trees that gifted me oxygen and the heat pumping through my apartment. Thank you, thank you, thank you, I whispered. I blew that gratitude into the paper and watched the fire consume it. Finally, I took the third piece and used it to call in something to replace what I'd released. Be careful what you call in, she'd warned, because it will come. Not always in the way you'd like, but in the way that you need. She had been very practical about the medium. If you're doing fire ceremony indoors, you burn either bay leaves or paper over a ceramic bowl or metal pot. Outdoors, you use sticks. Since I wasn't allowed to burn anything in my backyard, I conducted my fire ceremony indoors with my slips of paper and an incense burner. In the 10 years since that night, I've held hundreds of these ceremonies for myself, for clients, and for groups. Their power comes from the way they reorient us to the present and remind us that nothing is meant to last forever. Sitting with the fire brings me back into my own skin and reminds me exactly where my feet are hitting the ground. It shifts my focus away from despairing over the past and towards the possibilities for change. To everything there is a season, and fire is the alchemy that moves us from one to the next. It transmutes what was, and fueled by our gratitude, carries our intentions into what is becoming. Once I've worked at that energetic level, I can let go, entrusting the divine and divine timing to bring in what's next. There is also something deeply relational about working with fire. It reminds me that healing is not a solo act of willpower, but a collaboration with forces larger than the self. Fire ceremony gathers disparate inner parts and helps them face the same direction. I blew my intentions for abundance, community, and self-acceptance into the last orange rectangle and set it into the flame. I didn't walk out of that room fixed. I was still a budding mystic on the brink of years-long initiations and a mountain of questions. But as the smoke cleared, I felt a solid sense of grounding. I was an apprentice now, sitting in a sanctuary of ritual objects and chalkboard journaling, finally learning how to walk on the earth that had been holding me all along. Something in me reorganized. There was less pressure to figure things out or make anything happen. I felt more settled, with a sense that life could move again in its own time. Again, this is Allison Bruner. Thank you so much for listening. Tune in next time as I continue to share stories that draw directly from the volumes of journals I kept, detailed notes from every session, reflections, and small sparks of insight. I hope these stories offer a little light for anyone navigating change, uncertainty, or the work of inner alchemy. And if they do, please consider supporting my writing by heading over to Substack at medicinestones.substack.com, or make a donation at the bottom of my website at AlisonBruner.com.